Chapter 1 Whispers at the Edge. The edge of the hollow roots was not marked by any grand sign or ominous barrier. Instead, it was a subtle transition, a thinning of the familiar world until the trees themselves seemed to lean forward, watching, waiting. Elara stood there, the faded cloak around her shoulders heavy with the weight of countless miles and more countless losses. Her fingers absently traced the worn wood of her lute, a companion almost as fractured as her own mind. Around her, the forest breathed in slow, ancient rhythms. The moss clung like a whisper to gnarled bark, and the air was thick with scents both sweet and strange, damp earth, wildflowers long forgotten, and something deeper, older, that smelled faintly of shadowed memories. She had come here because of a sound, or rather, a sound that was no sound. A voice not quite her own, a melody half remembered, slipping through the cracks of her fractured memory. It called to her from the depths of the hollow roots, beckoning her with promises she could no longer name. As she stepped beneath the first arching branches, the forest seemed to lean in closer, its whispers brushing against her skin like the breath of ghosts. The light dimmed, filtered through leaves that shimmered with an otherworldly sheen. Her heart thudded with a mixture of fear and hope. Somewhere in this living labyrinth lay the shards of herself she had lost, memories swallowed by time and trauma, buried beneath layers of silence. Her footsteps were soft on the carpet of fallen leaves and twigs, the only sound besides the distant murmur of the forest's voice. She paused at the edge of a clearing where the trees arched high overhead, their roots twisting like ancient veins beneath the soil. The air here felt charged, alive with a quiet energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. It was then that she remembered the village elder's words. Old Joran had been waiting for her at the tavern, his eyes deep pools of knowledge and sorrow. His voice had been low and rough, like the bark of the oldest tree, as he explained the forest's terrible secret. "The hollow roots," he had said, "is no ordinary wood. It feeds not on flesh, but on memory. It consumes what you carry in your mind and heart, leaving emptiness where once there was life. The melodies you play, child, they are the key. Music can wake the forest's heart or soothe its hunger. But beware, the forest answers only to those who listen as much as they sing." Elara had nodded, the weight of his words settling over her like a shroud. That night she had played beneath the ancient canopy, her fingers trembling as they strummed the first haunting notes. The melody was a fragile thing, woven from threads of sorrow and longing, a song shaped by the shadows of forgotten dreams. As the notes floated through the air, the forest stirred. Leaves rustled like whispered secrets, and the roots beneath her feet seemed to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm. It was as if the very ground was breathing, awakening in response to her music. Elara closed her eyes, feeling the song reach into the depths of the woods and into the depths of herself. A sudden shiver ran down her spine. In that moment, the whispers grew louder, swirling around her like a mist of sound. She caught the faintest glimpse of a memory, a flash of a face, a fragment of a name, a feeling buried deep beneath years of silence. But before she could grasp it, it slipped away,
lost once more in the vastness of the forest's hunger. Opening her eyes, Elara met the gaze of the trees. They were watching, listening, and somewhere within their ancient roots something was awakening. The journey had begun. Night fell swiftly, and the forest's shadows deepened. Elara wrapped her cloak tighter around her and settled beneath a twisted oak, the echoes of her song still lingering in the air like fading stars. She listened to the whispers, trying to catch their meaning, trying to find the thread that would lead her back to herself. But the hollow roots were patient, and memory was a fragile, elusive thing. Yet, as the moon rose high and silver, Elara felt the faintest spark of hope flicker within her, a promise that somewhere, beneath the tangled canopy, her lost self awaited, waiting to be found in the song that bound them all. And so, with the first light of dawn, she would play again.
Chapter 2: Echoes of Forgotten Song. The forest breathed in a language older than words, and Elara felt it in the very marrow of her bones as she stepped beyond the trembling boundary of the hollow roots. The air thickened with the scent of damp earth and moss, the subtle hum of unseen life ringing in her ears like a distant choir. She moved cautiously, her fingers brushing against the bark of twisted trunks that seemed to pulse faintly beneath her touch. The sky above was a lattice of leaves, mottled with sunlight that filtered through in lazy golden shafts. Somewhere nearby, a brook babbled softly, its voice a delicate counterpoint to the rustling whispers of the canopy. Elara's heart beat unevenly, a mixture of anticipation and dread tightening her chest. The whispers she'd heard at the forest's edge had grown louder in her mind, a faint melody threading through the silence. Just as she was about to play another tentative note on her lute, a sudden burst of laughter broke the stillness. It was bright and clear, carrying the warmth of sunlight and a mischievous spark that startled her. She turned sharply toward the sound, eyes scanning the shadows, until a figure stepped into a patch of light. A young woman, no taller than a sapling, with wild red hair that flared like embers and eyes the color of fresh leaves, smiled at her. "You're not from here," she said, with a knowing tilt of her head, her voice carrying the lilt of someone who had spent a lifetime listening to the forest's secrets. Elara relaxed slightly, a fragile thread of trust weaving between them. "No," she admitted, "I'm searching for memories." The woman extended a hand. "I'm Mira. I live on the edge of these woods. I know their stories if you're willing to listen." Elara grasped her hand, warmth spreading through the contact. Together, they stepped deeper into the forest's embrace. Mira's stories unfolded like petals in bloom, tales of ancient trees that remembered the footsteps of forgotten travelers, of roots that whispered warnings, and shadows that danced between the realms of memory and oblivion. She spoke of the hollow root's hunger, how it feasted on the fragments of those who dared enter, erasing their pasts until only an empty shell remained. "Music," Mira said, "is the language the forest understands. It listens and sometimes answers. But be warned, not all it awakens is kind."
Elara nodded, the weight of responsibility settling upon her shoulders. She had come seeking to reclaim her lost self, but the path was fraught with peril she could barely fathom. As they wandered, a sudden hush fell over the woods. The bird song silenced, the breeze stilled. Elara felt the hairs on her neck rise, a cold pulse thrumming through the undergrowth. Compelled by an instinct she could not name, she lifted her lute and began to play. Her fingers danced across the strings, weaving a melody both haunting and tender, a song born of longing and shadows, of memories half glimpsed and half forgotten. The forest responded, leaves quivered, roots shifted beneath the soil, and from the darkness emerged a shape, a creature woven from sorrow itself. Its form shimmered and swayed, as if made from smoke and thorny vines, eyes glistening pools of anguish. Elara's breath caught. The monster was not merely a beast, but a manifestation of the pain buried deep within the forest and within herself. Mira stepped close, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. It feeds on forgotten sorrow. Your song called it forth. Heart pounding, Elara continued to play, her music a fragile thread binding her to the creature. She realized then that her melodies could summon not only memories, but the very fears and grief that lay hidden beneath the forest's ancient skin. The creature writhed, its sorrowful moan blending with the notes, and then, as if sated for the moment, it dissolved back into the shadows. Silence enveloped them once more. Elara lowered her lute, sweat beading on her brow. Mira's eyes shone with admiration and concern. "This is only the beginning," she whispered. Elara met her gaze, a new determination hardening within. The forest was alive, and it was listening. Her journey had become a song of power and peril, and she would have to learn its verses if she was to reclaim the fragments of herself lost to the hollow roots. Together, they moved forward, the echoes of the forgotten song lingering in the air like a promise and a warning. But as the shadows deepened around them, Elara knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back.
Chapter 3: Roots of Memory. The forest seemed to breathe beneath the twilight canopy, each leaf and root pulsing with an ancient rhythm that whispered secrets older than memory itself. Elara's feet sank slightly into the mossy earth as she followed Mira deeper into the hollow roots. The air was thick with the scent of damp bark and wild herbs, a heady perfume mingling with the faint metallic tang of something forgotten. Her fingers itched for the lute strapped across her back, the instrument that had become both her sword and shield in this strange living wilderness. Mira, bright-eyed and nimble, darted ahead with the ease of one born to the forest's edge. "This way," she urged softly, her voice barely rising above the susurrus of leaves. "There's a clearing just beyond those thickets, where the light lingers long after sunset. It's a place the forest guards jealously, but I think it's where your family once made their pact."
Elara's breath caught, her heart tightening in a knot of hope and fear. The pact, an ancient binding between her bloodline and the hollow roots, had been nothing more than a whisper in her fractured memories, a fragment she could not grasp until now. Elara followed Mira with tentative steps, the dappled light weaving patterns of green and gold across the forest floor. The clearing opened before them like a secret kept through centuries. Tall, gnarled trees circled around a bed of soft moss, dotted with luminous fungi that glowed faintly in the dimming light. It was here that Elara felt the forest's pulse most keenly, a living heartbeat that thrummed beneath her skin. "Play," Mira said, settling herself on a low stone, eyes wide with expectation. Elara drew her lute forward, her fingers trembling as they found the strings. The first notes were tentative, fragile as spider silk, yet they wove through the air like threads of light. She let the melody grow, delicate and haunting, a song born of longing and loss, of roots tangled in soil and memory. From the shadows, a movement stirred. The creature appeared slowly, as if woven from the forest itself, its skin a tapestry of bark and vines, knotted roots curling like ancient fingers, its eyes deep pools of sorrowful amber, fixed on Elara with wary intelligence. The forest's guardian, restless and agitated, paced with heavy, creaking steps. Elara's song shifted, softening, wrapping around the creature like a balm. The notes spoke of peace and understanding, of forgotten bonds and promises kept through silence. The monster's pacing slowed, the tension in its limbs easing until it stood still, as if listening. Mira's whisper broke the hush. "You've done it. Your music, it reaches into the heart of the forest." Elara exhaled slowly, a fragile smile touching her lips. For the first time, the forest did not feel like a consuming void, but a place of connection, complex, ancient, and achingly alive. As night deepened, they gathered beneath the sheltering branches, the air humming with unseen life. Mira shared stories of Elara's ancestors, how they had once walked in harmony with the hollow roots, their blood intertwined with the forest's fate. Each tale was a thread, weaving Elara closer to the tapestry of her own history. But yet, as hope blossomed, a shadow lingered in Elara's chest. The boundary between herself and the forest was thinning. The memories she sought tangled with the forest's hunger for forgetting. Could she reclaim the fragments of her identity without losing herself entirely? The rustle of leaves echoed softly, as if the forest itself waited for her answer. And Elara knew this was only the beginning.
Chapter 4. The Sentinels Test. The air grew cooler as Elara stepped beneath the dense canopy, the light filtering through the ancient leaves, casting mottled patterns on the mossy floor. Every footfall was softened by the thick carpet of fallen leaves and tangled roots, and the forest itself seemed to watch, holding its breath. She had ventured farther than she had dared before, the whispers of lost memories tugging her forward like a faint melody she could almost hear. Ahead, a sudden clearing broke the endless tangle of green. Standing motionless at its center was a figure, tall, imposing, and at once part of the forest, and yet utterly apart from it. His skin was rough and bark-like, mottled with the texture of gnarled wood, and his eyes shone like polished amber, glowing softly with a strange ancient light. The figure was Thalor, the sentinel of the hollow roots, whose presence was as old as the forest itself. Elara's breath caught, but she did not falter. She stepped forward, clutching her lute close to her chest, the instrument both a shield and a key. The silent tension between them stretched like a taut string, a fragile thread woven with suspicion and unspoken history. "Why have you come?" Thalor's voice rumbled, deep and slow, "to the heart of the hollow roots, where few tread and fewer return." His gaze bore into her, searching, questioning, challenging. Elara met his eyes steadily. "I seek what was lost to me, my memories, my past, myself. The forest consumes, but I believe music can unlock what is buried beneath the roots." Thalor's expression was unreadable, a mask carved from wood and shadow. "Many come with songs, but few understand the price the forest demands. How do I know you are not another lost soul drawn to oblivion?" Before she could answer, the forest seemed to shift. Shadows coalesced at the edges of the clearing, shapes twisting and writhing into figures, ghostly echoes of forgotten memories and fears. They reached toward Elara, silent specters born of the forest's hunger. Elara's fingers found the strings of her lute, and she began to play. A melody low and trembling, weaving threads of sorrow and strength. Each chord was a breath of defiance, a plea for remembrance. The shadows faltered, then retreated, dissolving back into the forest depths. Thalor lodged, his amber eyes reflecting the flickering light of her music. He stepped forward, the sound of his movement like the rustle of leaves in a windless grove. "You have courage," he said quietly, "and a song that binds you to this place. But the forest is older than any melody, and its memory is long and cruel." Elara nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. "I do not seek to tame the forest, only to understand it, and myself." Thalor's stern gaze softened, a flicker of empathy breaking through the stoic facade. "Then walk carefully, Elara. The hollow roots remember everything, and forgive nothing." With that, he turned, his form blending once more with the ancient trees, leaving a path open for Elara to continue her journey. Yet the sentinel's presence lingered, a solemn reminder of the trials ahead. As Elara stepped deeper into the forest, her heart thrummed with a mixture of fear and hope. The sentinel's test had been passed, but the true challenge was only beginning. Somewhere beyond the next bend, the forest awaited, alive with secrets and shadows, humming with the pulse of ancient magic, and hungry for the song she carried within her. She paused briefly, her fingers brushing the strings once more, coaxing a soft, haunting tune from the lute. The melody was fragile, like the first light through mist, yet it carried the promise of revelation. And as the notes drifted upward, mingling with the whispers of the hollow roots, Elara felt the first stirrings of a truth long buried beneath layers of forgotten memories. The sentinel's test was not an end, but a beginning, a fragile thread woven into the tapestry of her journey. The forest's ancient magic was no mere backdrop, it was a living force, entwined with her fate. And with every note, every step,
Elara was drawing closer to the heart of the hollow roots and the fragments of herself waiting to be reclaimed. Her resolve hardened. She would face whatever shadows the forest conjured, whatever monsters her music might awaken. For in the interplay of loss and melody, in the fragile dance between forgetting and remembering, lay the key to her salvation. And somewhere deep within the living forest, Salor watched and waited, bound by duty, yet torn by empathy, a sentinel caught between the past and the uncertain future that Elara's song was beginning to shape. The path ahead was dark and tangled, but Elara's music was a light, a fragile, flickering flame in the endless night of the hollow roots. She stepped forward, the sentinel's warning echoing softly in her mind. "Walk carefully, Elara. The hollow roots remember everything and forgive nothing." And with that, the forest embraced her once more, swallowing her whole into its ancient, whispering heart.
Chapter 5 Tales in the Whispering Vines. The air here was thick with an ancient breath, heavy as if the forest itself exhaled centuries of secrets with every rustling leaf. Elara moved carefully beneath the dense canopy, her boots sinking softly into damp moss and fallen leaves, the scent of earth and decay mingling with a faint sweetness she could not name. Beside her, Mira's steps were lighter, more sure, guided by years living at the forest's edge and a keen eye for its deceptive beauty. "Do you hear it?" Mira whispered, her voice barely rising above the low hum that seemed to pulse through the air. Elara paused, her fingers curling around the neck of her lute. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper curled through the branches like the soft intake of breath. The whispering vines, those uncanny plants that curled and twined like living threads, seemed to stir in response to her presence. Their leaves shimmered faintly, catching the dim light and fluttering as though beckoning. Tentatively, Elara plucked a note, a slow, trembling sound that wove through the shadows. The vines moved in rhythm, their tendrils swaying with a subtle grace that was almost hypnotic. The melody was fragile, like a fragile thread tugged from the depths of her soul, and it seemed to awaken something ancient in the forest. The vines rustled softly, their whispers growing clearer, not as words, but as echoes, faint images flickering just beyond sight. Faces, names, moments long forgotten hovered at the edges of perception, like fragments of a dream dissolving at dawn. Elara's breath caught as she felt the weight of those lost memories brush against her own fractured past. Mira knelt beside a cluster of phosphorescent fungi, her fingers deftly gathering herbs as her eyes reflected the soft glow. "These woods hold stories," she murmured, "stories that don't always wish to be told." Elara nodded, her gaze fixed on the shifting shadows within the vines. "And some of those stories are mine." She played again, weaving sorrow and hope into the melody. The forest answered, not just with movement, but with a palpable pulse, as if the very roots beneath their feet throbbed with the weight of memory and loss. The vines quivered, revealing faint shapes, sigils ancient and cryptic, carved into bark and stone, echoes of an old pact long buried beneath the soil. This revelation stirred a tempest inside Elara. The forest was not merely a place of danger, it was a living archive of pain and resilience, intertwined with her own history. Yet with each note, the boundaries blurred further between what was hers and what belonged to the forest. "We must be cautious," Mira said softly, sensing the shift in the air. "The forest remembers, but it also guards its secrets fiercely." Elara's fingers faltered briefly, the weight of uncertainty pressing down. Yet beneath the fear, a fragile thread of hope took root. Through her music, she could reach these forgotten corners, coax out the truths buried deep beneath the hollow roots. As they pressed onward, the vines continued to whisper, their voices a haunting chorus that both beckoned and warned. Elara played on, her song a fragile bridge between memory and oblivion, loss and discovery, a melody that would lead her deeper into the heart of the forest and closer to the truth of herself. But with every note, the forest listened, and the shadows stirred. The journey was only beginning. Chapter 6. Fragments beneath the canopy. The air shifted as Elara stepped beneath the thick canopy of the hollow roots. The sunlight filtered into shards of gold and green that danced upon the forest floor. The glade ahead was small, almost forgotten, cradled by ancient trees whose gnarled roots curled like sleeping serpents beneath the moss. Here, the air hummed with an ancient pulse, subtle yet insistent, as if the very earth remembered stories long buried. Beside her, Mira's bright eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and caution. "This is it," she whispered, lifting a hand to brush aside a curtain of hanging vines. "The heart of the forest's memory." Elara's fingers trembled as she entered the clearing. Her gaze fell upon the moss-covered stones scattered like scattered bones across the glade. Each stone bore carvings, runes weathered by time but still faintly glowing with a deep green light. Symbols she recognized, or perhaps half remembered, tangled in her mind like threads pulled loose. They spoke of binding, of protection, and of a pact older than any living thing. "These markings," Elara murmured, tracing the air above one carved shape, "are the same as on the pendant I wear." Mira nodded, kneeling to examine the earth near a stone altar. "Your family's blood is tied to this place, Elara. The pact between your ancestors and the hollow roots was meant to keep balance, give and take, memory for life." A cold weight settled in Elara's palm as she lifted the pendant, its rune-inscribed surface smooth and unyielding. For a moment, a flicker of warmth bloomed deep inside her chest, a half glimpse of a memory too fragile to hold. "Do you feel that?" Mira's voice was hushed, reverent. Elara closed her eyes, tuning her senses to the forest's song. The usual whispers were now punctuated by a low growl, a murmur of unrest deep in the shadows. Shapes shifted just beyond the glade's edge, twisted forms made of bark and shadow, eyes glowing with sorrow and rage.
Forest monsters, manifestations of forgotten pain, lurched into view, drawn by the stirring of ancient ties. Heart pounding, Elara reached instinctively for her lute. Each string hummed beneath her fingers, weaving a melody that was both a lullaby and a summons. The music wrapped around the creatures, coaxing some to stillness while others snarled in resistance, their forms flickering between fear and fury. From the periphery came the sudden, silent arrival of Thalor. His bark-like skin blended seamlessly with the surrounding trees, and his amber eyes fixed on Elara with a mixture of challenge and reluctant sympathy. You walk a dangerous path, but the forest listens more than you know. Elara met his gaze, feeling the weight of his sentinel's burden and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, her reclaimed memories could restore balance rather than bring ruin. The glade seemed to hold its breath as the music rose, a fragile thread binding past and present, memory and identity, light and shadow. Somewhere beneath the canopy, the roots whispered and the forest waited. Yet even as Elara played, the monsters pressed closer, their snarls merging with the haunting notes. The pact was alive, but so was the hunger, and the forest's ancient hunger was far from sated. And so, beneath the hollow roots, Elara realized her journey was only beginning.
Chapter 7. The Song of Betrayal. The forest was quieter than before, but the silence held a different weight now, an uneasy stillness that prickled at Elara's skin like the touch of cold leaves. She glanced at Mira, whose bright eyes scanned the shadows with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The sun filtered through the ancient canopy in fractured patterns, the dappled light painting the forest floor in shifting mosaics of green and gold. "Do you feel it?" Mira whispered, her voice barely above the rustle of leaves. Elara nodded, her fingers lightly brushing the strings of her lute. "The forest is watching." A soft shimmer caught her eye, a flicker of movement that seemed almost too fluid to be real. From between two gnarled oaks emerged a figure, delicate and translucent. It moved with a grace that was both mesmerizing and unsettling, its form woven from mist and leaves, shifting like a mirage in the humid air. The spirit's eyes sparkled like dew-dropped spiderwebs, inviting and ancient. "You seek answers," the spirit said, its voice a melody of rustling branches and distant chimes. "Follow me, and I shall show you the path to your forgotten truths." Elara hesitated, her heart pounding. Trust was a fragile thing in the hollow roots, yet the spirit's words echoed the whispers she had chased for so long. "Will you help me reclaim what is lost?" she asked. "If you dare," the spirit replied, stepping forward. Mira placed a hand on Elara's arm. "Be cautious. Not all that glitters is the forest's friend." Together, they followed the spirit's drifting form deeper into the woods.
The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the canopy overhead seemed to lean closer, blotting out the sky. Shadows stretched and twisted as if the trees themselves were bending to watch their passage. At first, the spirit's guidance seemed true. It led them along hidden trails lined with blooming nightshade and whispered secrets. Elara played soft melodies to soothe the restless forest, her music weaving a fragile thread of calm. But as they ventured further, subtle changes crept into the forest's mood. The whispers turned to murmurs, and the gentle sway of branches became an ominous rustling. Without warning, the spirit's form flickered and shuddered, its comforting visage warped into something darker, eyes glinting with cold cunning, a smile twisted like thorned vines. The ground beneath them trembled as roots erupted from the soil, snarling and twisting into grotesque shapes. The forest's monsters, long stirred by Elara's melodies, surged forward with renewed fury. "Betrayed," Elara gasped, heart sinking as she realized the spirit had lured them into a trap. Mira stepped close, her voice steady despite the rising chaos. "We must stand together. Your song is our shield." Ilara's fingers trembled as she gripped her lute, the strings cold beneath her touch. Closing her eyes, she summoned the deepest chords she could muster, a haunting melody woven from sorrow, defiance, and hope. The notes wove through the snarling roots and snarls, a luminous thread of sound that began to unravel the forest's rage. The monstrous vines recoiled, the shadows retreating like tide drawn back from shore. When the final note faded, the forest sighed, a breath of ancient pain and tentative peace. Breathing heavily, Elara opened her eyes to find Mira's steady gaze anchoring her trembling soul. "We cannot trust the forest spirits," Elara murmured, "but we have each other." Mira nodded, her smile fierce and unwavering. "And that will be our greatest song yet." As they picked their way out of the shattered glade, the betrayal lingered like a shadow, but so did a new resolve, one born from the harshest lesson of the hollow roots, that in a world where memory could be devoured and trust twisted, the strongest melodies were those sung together. The forest watched silently, but Elara's song was no longer just a call. It was a challenge, and the song had only just begun.